This is called fair use and is allowed for purposes of criticism, news, reporting, teaching, and parody, which does not infringe on copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107. What if the United States of America collapse? This scenario is not entirely improbable, as it was thought of both by Emmanuel Todd and by Professor Igor. No nostrils in both cases. This anticipation has of course fueled controversy, but it is supported in the sense that all empires eventually go into recession or even fragment. After all, Vladimir Putin called the collapse of the Soviet Union the worst geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and that his mandate was essentially to recover the influence of the Soviet Union until perhaps obtaining a Yalta 2.0. This is also very precisely what someone close to Putin said recently on French television.
Vous allez demander une nouvelle Yalta à les Russes.
Negotiate Yalta 2.0, and this term Yalta was not trivial. On the one hand, because it is of course Crimea, but on the other hand, because Yalta was the culmination of the balance of power between Stalin and the other powers, despite the fact that the United States and developing the atomic bomb. What Stalin already knew very well, since these spy networks had completely infiltrated the Manhattan Project. So, once again, I don't want to be primary anti-Americanism, and I'm even going to tell you that today, if the United States of America collapsed, it would be a geopolitical catastrophe. I will say, but how about the butchers of Iraq, those who massacred Afghanistan, those who destabilized Syria, those who destroyed Libya? Yes, it's catastrophic to say, but that's how it is in the sense that the United States has become all big, doing everything in relation. Internationally, they have become like a systemic bank, as it is called I always think of the indescribable citadel which today controls more than 40% of transactions, where Madoff, for example, in market making, had to peak at only 20%. And we are now seeing antitrust cases emerging, especially for the technology giants Google and Facebook find themselves in the hot seat. But you can't bring an antitrust lawsuit to the United States of America, even if their weight on international relations is absolutely unimaginable today. The United States has made itself so important in foreign affairs, in relations between sovereign nations. If it were to collapse, it would be a disaster that would take tens of millions of screws with it. Certainly how to imagine that, even though we no longer have a balance of power, like during the Cold War when the Soviet Union somehow balanced American influence and where countries like France were already trying to be no-aligned and have a foreign policy that would balance both sides. Because the United States today has the largest diplomacy in the world's reserve currency, the largest military logistics in the world with unparalleled projection capabilities. If you consider the fact that France has only one aircraft carrier and add to them the gargantuan number of aircraft carriers that the United States has, you will understand how successful they have become. All big, all do. And that's basically it. The problem is the immaturity of relations between states since the end of the 30 Years' War. In 148, we have an order from you in connection with the Treaty of Westphalia negotiated by Cardinal Mazarin, a great precursor of the tolerant negotiated treaty in Western Mali in 1815 with the Congress of Vienna. Well, international relations haven't really evolved. We have compromises dictated by the balance of power. And when the balance of power between nations evolves, we have wars. We have a redistribution of the cards, and the fact that we think exactly the same way when 148 today, when we have the atomic bomb, whereas we have colossal industrialized and even computerized armies, tomorrow equipped with artificial intelligence. And the reason why the United States is all big to fail in international relations to have stability in a Westphalian system, and even in reality, we could go back to ancient Rome. The Pax Romana, well, you have to have an ultra-dominant, an empire that will break up everyone who will totally abuse the fact that he can break up everyone who will totally abuse the fact that he can Romanize at the time of the Romans, Americanize the elites were calling that. The Romans Romanized by taking the sons hostage of the nobles of the federated peoples whom they had submitted. He took them to Rome, made them speak Latin, taught them military strategy and the Roman legal system, so that when these young people from the federated peoples decided to return to their respective regions, well, they would Romanize them by constructing terms, by using Roman jurs, by impromen jurisprudence, and in general, by appeasing more Latin. Well, the Americans are doing the same with the English-American Foundation in the English case, but with the formidable power of attraction of their universities, which today remain the best in the world and by which they can attract young elites from all nations, devices to thereto ensure that they were going to preach the American creed. We must of course compare the American Empire to the Roman Empire. And it's always fun to make that comparison in the sense that Americans use the eagle as a symbol and they use the drive beam also as a symbol that we find on the statue of Abraham Lincoln, as well as the eclairs and olives for that matter. Putin had indeed reminded the head of American diplomacy of this. At the time when he came to visit, I believe it was Bolton told him normally, "Your ruler has eclairs on one side and olives on the other. What happened with the olives? Did you eat all the olives?" Well, it's basically because the American Empire sees itself as the heritage to the Roman Empire, even if the Roman Empire remains the last to have succeeded in unifying the whole of the Mediterranean. No empire ever again united the whole Mediterranean. Neither the Genoese, the Venetians, the Spaniards, the French, the English, or the Ottomans could unify. Neither the Germans even were able to unify the Mediterranean again. And probably that will never happen again. Even if Klaus Schwab continue to arrive from his world government, against which, moreover, Musk has publicly rebelled, and that is the reason why Musk is the subject of a global smear campaign. We went as far as Paris Match to attack Elon Musk, whose only sin was to open Twitter's secret files and demonstrate that, yes, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had conspired to manipulate the American elections by hiding the existence of the abominable case of Hunter Biden laptop. The crackhead, guilty of embezzlement. Despite this, it remains necessary for the affairs of the world. If it's not unbelievable what would happen if the American empire collapsed. Brzezinski had already asked this question in the large chessboard in '97, which remains an absolutely crystal clear reading. And we must always thank Brzezinski under this point. Despite all the controversies, just so proud of his person and the position he had taken in Afghanistan, where it was he, of course, who had supported the Taliban at the time. Well, the clarity of Brzezinski's foreign policy expression remains today more than 25 years. After his grand chessboard exposition, namely, what if the American empire collapses and well already Japan will rearm pell-mell, this is exactly what we see today. And yes, without the American empire, what would prevent China from invading Japan? Or in any case to declare war on it? And to claim the Senkaku Islands. For the Chinese, well, nothing in fact apart from the capacity of Japan to develop nuclear weapons. So the first thing we would see if we had this superpower, this hyperpower that went into recession, geopolitical not economic, is a global rearmament in weapons of mass destruction, a global nuclear proliferation, all the countries that could arm themselves with ape bombs accordingly. That of course includes Japan, but also Germany, but also several African countries, but most certainly Iran, which would be justified. In this we could say no. If the United States collapses, Iran would no longer have any reason to have the bomb. Not at all, because there are still nuclear powers in the region, namely Pakistan, Israel, but also Russia. Turkey would also be very tempted to develop atomic weapons. So in general, we would see widespread nuclear rearmament. And the fact that South America, by the Monroe Doctrine, have no nuclear power and would die with the American empire. Brazil would be extremely trying to develop atomic weapons, and it has the scientific and technical capabilities, even if it does not necessarily have the capabilities to have a large nuclear launcher industry. So the first thing you would see would be a South Africa. Finally, all the BRICS are clearly armed, such as China, Russia, and India. But we would therefore see Brazil, South Africa clearly arming themselves, and Japan clearly arming themselves, and I don't see what would keep Malaysia from arming itself clearly too. And there we would be in a world that would be much more dangerous. So on the one hand, we have the fact that the United States totally abuses the fact that they are stifled in geopolitics. Because let's be clear, if ever Malaysia and Japan have decided to arm themselves, clearly it's not France. It's not the UK that could stop them. And I'm even going to say better, if ever Germany, which is neighbor of France, decided to arm itself, clearly, France today would not be in a position to prevent it at all, even if the United States had collapsed, even though the weather had collapsed, of course, because time would already have collapsed at that time. Well, even in this scenario, France would not have the diplomatic possibility to prevent Germany from arming itself clearly, which it would therefore do very quickly. And obviously we would end up with a much more dangerous world, in which we would have local players who would dominate the others. We would have regional powers dominating the others, and such a world would obviously be accompanied by additional war. So we should not wish for the collapse of the American empire. We must wish for its rebalancing. We must wish for greater multipolarity. We must hope for the emergence of BRICS, and an ability not only to develop local military powers, but above all diplomatic powers. The local arbitration capacity is what is actually missing in this world, as we are in a world that still thinks like in the days of the Pax Romana. Mourning of the few rare innovations of the Peace of Westphalia and Rare Thursday, even if they have been taught for years at Sciences Po, they remain rare compared to what was already done in the time of ancient Rome, with clientelism and with the balance of power, that is to say that international relations remain entirely dictated by the balance of power, in the sense that the United States, because they are the strongest, can violate international law, and any other nation that is stronger could also violate international law, absolutely with impunity today. Much of the stability of the world is due to the fact that the United States can kick any country's ass if they wish, either diplomatically if the nuclear country or economically as they do with Russia. Even if Russia is perfectly trained, and was fully able to survive its disconnection from SWIFT, which Greece was not. Moreover, we can think that Bruno Le Maire, the funny one, really believed for a moment that Russia was like Greece, and that disconnecting it from the SWIFT network was going to be enough to bring it to its knees. This is of course not the case, remember. The media. Well, in France, we continue to say that Russia was going to be brought to its knees. It was of course a lie to the people. But yet the United States has the most dominant power and balance of power not only today but in all of human history. No nation has been able to impose its will anywhere in the world the way the United States can do today, including extremely advanced techniques of economic warfare. What if the United States collapsed? Well, the world would become much more dangerous, much more unstable from high-intensity regional warfare. I am talking about war on the level of the Iran-Iraq war, which, however, was wanted by the United States and emerged well and everywhere in all areas, and we would end up with the need for arbitration, but without the United Nations being able to do anything since. After all, we created the Society of Nations to prevent the Second World War. She didn't make it. The United Nations was created to prevent the Cold War. They didn't succeed at all. Today, we are no better off than in 1914. We continue to have an international policy based on bilateral treaties. Simply, we have the illusion that the United Nations functions as a peacekeeping system.
The fact that this veto is being done in defense of American sovereignty and in defense of America's role in the Middle East peace process is not a source of embarrassment for us. It should be an embarrassment to the remainder of the Security Council. The United States will not be told by any country where we can put our embassy. Buried even deeper in the jargon of this resolution is the accusation that the United States is setting back the prospects of peace in the Middle East. That is a scandalous charge. What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten. It's one more example of the United Nations doing more harm than good in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Today, for the simple act of deciding where to put our embassy, the United States was forced to defend its sovereignty. The record will reflect that we did so proudly.
The United States today is capable of kicking the ass of about 80–90% of the nations of the world, and its military budget is greater than the budget of the next 5 nations combined. And basically, the observation that a sudden collapse of the American empire would be catastrophic for international relations is an observation of the fact that the United States is suffocated in international matters. Let him take full advantage of this dominant position to violate the law as he wishes and destroy countries as he wishes, for example, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, which they did not manage to destroy, but which they damaged very seriously and at the bottom. The observation of this geopolitical situation, and that we, the humans, the citizens, have not been able to innovate to create an international order more effective than the law of the strongest, that we have not been able to innovate or create a system of relations between peoples and a sovereign nation, which can regulate itself, which can work. Well, if I wanted to be idealistic, I will conclude with the point of view of people like Ali and Deo, Sufi masters, founder of the Sufi school of peace and services, or as the absolutely identical position of Sadhguru and as the absolutely identical position of Martin Luther King's. Until you have made peace in your mind, making peace in the world is out of the question, and that's what the Constitution said. Of UNESCO, we observe that since wars originate in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that we must erect the barriers of the call.